It was a beautiful autumn morning, and Sarah stepped outside her cozy house with her morning coffee. She lived in a charming neighborhood where houses had big yards and old trees lined the streets. What made her home special was the creek that ran right through her property. The sound of flowing water had been her morning companion for 15 years. Down by the creek, Sarah could see deer drinking water early in the morning. Rabbits hopped around, and birds sang from the trees. It wasn't just any creek, it was the heart of their little community. Children used to catch tadpoles there, and neighbors would gather for picnics by its banks. But something was changing in the neighborhood. Over the past few years, the old houses near the main road had been torn down and replaced with fancy new homes. These weren't just regular houses, they were like mansions with perfectly trimmed lawns, fancy gates, and expensive cars in the driveways. The people who moved into these homes brought something else with them. The Homeowners Association, or HOA as everyone called it. At first, the HOA seemed harmless. They put up nice signs at the neighborhood entrance and organized a few community events. But soon, they started making rules about everything. Your grass couldn't be too long. Your mailbox had to be a certain color. Your car had to be parked in a specific way. Sarah noticed that at the HOA meetings, the conversation kept coming back to the creek. The HOA president would stand up and talk about how the creek looked messy and natural. He'd say things like, "We need to modernize our neighborhood, and property values are important." Sarah didn't understand why anyone would want to change something so beautiful and peaceful. One evening, her neighbor Tom stopped by. He'd been to the latest HOA meeting. "They're talking about the creek again," he said, shaking his head. "They keep saying it's bringing down the value of the new homes." Can you believe that? As weeks passed, the tension grew. The creek had been flowing through the neighborhood for generations. It helped drain rainwater during storms and kept the ground healthy. The older residents like Sarah knew this, but the new homeowners seemed to think they could control nature itself. Sarah started documenting everything about the creek, taking photos, noting how the water flowed, and watching how wildlife depended on it. She had a feeling that something was about to happen, though she never imagined what was coming. The peaceful sound of flowing water continued to fill her mornings, but now there was an uneasy feeling in the air. The creek had always been there, steady and reliable. It had survived storms, seasons, and years of change. But could it survive the HOA's plans for improvement? Sarah looked out her window at the creek, wondering what tomorrow would bring to their once peaceful neighborhood. The concrete trucks arrived just before dawn on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was awakened by the rumbling engines and bright headlights streaming through her bedroom window. Grabbing her bathrobe, she rushed outside to find 3 massive trucks stationed along her street. Workers in hard hats were already unloading equipment. "What's going on?" Sarah demanded, approaching the lead worker. He looked tired, like he'd been up all night. "We're here to pour concrete in the creek, ma'am. Started at 6 a.m. as scheduled." He showed her a clipboard with official documents. "But nobody told us this was happening today." Sarah's heart raced as she watched more workers arrive. "This is our neighborhood creek. You can't just fill it with concrete." The worker shrugged. "Ma'am, I just work here. We have the permits from the HOA and the county. Everything's been approved. I suggest you talk to your HOA board." Within minutes, the peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of machinery. Workers began setting up concrete forms alongside the creek. Sarah watched in horror as they prepared to transform the flowing water into a concrete channel. She immediately started calling everyone she could think of: the county office, the environmental agency, even her local congressman's office. "I'm sorry, but the permits were filed properly," the county official explained over the phone. "The HOA submitted all the necessary paperwork 2 months ago. It was listed in public notices. But no one knew." Sarah protested. "They kept it secret from us." By mid-morning, other residents had gathered. Some were just curious, but many were angry and confused. Mrs. Johnson from the house next door stood there crying. My grandmother lived here before me. This creek has been part of our lives for 3 generations. The workers continued their job, following orders without emotion. They built wooden forms to contain the concrete. They laid plastic sheets. They checked their measurements again and again. To them, it was just another construction project. Around noon, the first load of concrete was poured. Sarah watched the gray mixture flow over the rocky creek bed, burying the smooth stones that had been there for decades. The water started backing up immediately, trying to find a new path. Small puddles formed where there had never been standing water before. "Stop!" Sarah shouted at the workers. "You're destroying a natural water system. This creek helps drain rain from the whole neighborhood." The foreman finally came over. "Look, lady, I understand you're upset, but this is all legal. The HOA owns the rights to manage this waterway. They say concrete is better for drainage and property values. They don't know what they're doing." Sarah felt panic rising. This creek has been draining our neighborhood for 50 years. You can't just concrete over nature without consequences. But the workers kept going. Load after load of concrete was poured. The natural bends and curves of the creek were buried under straight lines and sharp angles. By sunset, half the creek was encased in concrete. The workers packed up their equipment, promising to return tomorrow to finish the job. Sarah stood alone by the partially destroyed creek as darkness fell. The remaining water struggled to flow through its new concrete prison. She could hear the stressed burbling of the water, fighting against its artificial constraints. Tomorrow, they would finish what they'd started, and the creek, their beloved creek, would be gone forever. She wondered if anyone would notice until it was too late. That night, Sarah barely slept. Through her window, she could hear the creek's new concrete voice, and it sounded like a warning. The HOA meetings started getting more secretive. Where they used to post big notices about when and where they'd meet, now there were just quick emails sent at the last minute. Sarah tried to attend every meeting she could, but sometimes she'd only hear about them after they'd already happened. At one meeting she managed to attend, the HOA board members kept talking in hushed voices about drainage solutions and waterway management. Whenever Sarah asked questions about what they meant, they'd give vague answers about improvements and modernization. One Thursday evening, Sarah was driving home from work when she saw something strange. A group of men in suits were standing by the creek with clipboards and measuring tools. They had official-looking badges and were taking photos from different angles. When Sarah approached them, they told her they were conducting an assessment, but wouldn't explain what for. The next morning, she woke up to find small orange flags dotted all along the creek. They ran from where the water entered their neighborhood all the way down to where it exited near the park. Sarah photographed every single flag, feeling like she was collecting evidence for something, though she wasn't sure what. During her lunch break at work, Sarah got a call from her neighbor Tom. "Did you get the permit notice?" he asked. "What permit notice?" she replied, confused. Tom explained that a small paper had been attached to some residents' mailboxes that morning. It was barely readable. The type was tiny and the language was full of legal terms. Hidden in all that confusing text was a mention of concrete channeling and waterway reconstruction. That weekend, Sarah knocked on every door in the neighborhood. Some people hadn't even noticed the notice. Others couldn't understand what it meant. The few who had attended recent HOA meetings said they'd only heard vague talk about beautifying the area, not anything about concrete. The HOA president lived in one of the biggest new houses at the end of the street. When Sarah finally caught him at home, he was washing his luxury car. "We're just making necessary improvements," he said, not even looking at her. "The creek needs better flow control. It's all about property values." When she pressed him for details, he simply said, "Everything's been approved through proper channels," and went back to polishing his car. That evening, Sarah sat by her window, watching the creek in the fading light. The water sparkled as it flowed over smooth stones and around fallen branches. Fish darted beneath the surface, and a family of ducks paddled past. How could anyone think this needed to be covered in concrete? She made a decision then and there. First thing Monday morning, she would go to the county office and find out exactly what permits had been filed. She would call the Environmental Protection Agency. She would do whatever it took to protect this creek. But as she watched the sunset paint the water gold, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was already too late. The wheels had been set in motion, and something was coming that would change their neighborhood forever. The concrete trucks arrived just before dawn on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was awakened by the rumbling engines and bright headlights streaming through her bedroom window. Grabbing her bathrobe, she rushed outside to find 3 massive trucks stationed along her street. Workers in hard hats were already unloading equipment. "What's going on?" Sarah demanded, approaching the lead worker. He looked tired, like he'd been up all night. "We're here to pour concrete in the creek, ma'am. Started at 6 a.m. as scheduled." He showed her a clipboard with official documents. "But nobody told us this was happening today." Sarah's heart raced as she watched more workers arrive. "This is our neighborhood creek. You can't just fill it with concrete." The worker shrugged. "Ma'am, I just work here. We have the permits from the HOA and the county. Everything's been approved. I suggest you talk to your HOA board." Within minutes, the peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of machinery. Workers began setting up concrete forms alongside the creek. Sarah watched in horror as they prepared to transform the flowing water into a concrete channel. She immediately started calling everyone she could think of: the county office, the environmental agency, even her local congressman's office. "I'm sorry, but the permits were filed properly," the county official explained over the phone. "The HOA submitted all the necessary paperwork 2 months ago. It was listed in public notices. But no one knew." Sarah protested. "They kept it secret from us." By mid-morning, other residents had gathered. Some were just curious, but many were angry and confused. Mrs. Johnson from the house next door stood there crying. "My grandmother lived here before me. This creek has been part of our lives for 3 generations." The workers continued their job, following orders without emotion. They built wooden forms to contain the concrete. They laid plastic sheets. They checked their measurements again and again. To them, it was just another construction project. Around noon, the first load of concrete was poured. Sarah watched the gray mixture flow over the rocky creek bed, burying the smooth stones that had been there for decades. The water started backing up immediately, trying to find a new path. Small puddles formed where there had never been standing water before. "Stop," Sarah shouted at the workers. "You're destroying a natural water system. This creek helps drain rain from the whole neighborhood." The foreman finally came over. "Look, lady, I understand you're upset, but this is all legal. The HOA owns the rights to manage this waterway. They say concrete is better for drainage and property values. They don't know what they're doing." Sarah felt panic rising. "This creek has been draining our neighborhood for 50 years. You can't just concrete over nature without consequences." But the workers kept going. Load after load of concrete was poured. The natural bends and curves of the creek were buried under straight lines and sharp angles. By sunset, half the creek was encased in concrete. The workers packed up their equipment, promising to return tomorrow to finish the job. Sarah stood alone by the partially destroyed creek as darkness fell. The remaining water struggled to flow through its new concrete prison. She could hear the stressed burbling of the water, fighting against its artificial constraints. Tomorrow, they would finish what they'd started, and the creek, their beloved creek, would be gone forever. She wondered if anyone would notice until it was too late. That night, Sarah barely slept. Through her window, she could hear the creek's new concrete voice, and it sounded like a warning. 2 weeks after the concrete trucks left, the first big storm hit their neighborhood. Sarah woke up to the sound of heavy rain pelting her roof. She immediately thought about the creek and grabbed her raincoat to check outside. The scene that greeted her was shocking. Where the creek used to flow smoothly, even during storms, now there was chaos. The water had no choice but to rush against the harsh concrete walls. It backed up at every turn, where the concrete channel couldn't handle the natural flow. Instead of spreading out across the natural banks, the water rose higher and higher. Sarah ran down the street to check on the new houses. What she saw made her gasp. Water was pooling in the fancy yards of the million-dollar homes. The beautiful landscaping that the HOA members had shown off was now underwater. From her higher ground, Sarah could see the water's edge creeping closer to the house's foundations. By morning, several basements were flooded. Residents who had installed expensive home theaters and wine cellars watched their investments get ruined. The HOA president stood on his porch, shouting into his phone, water lapping at his doorstep. His perfectly manicured lawn was now a small lake. "I told them this would happen," Tom said, joining Sarah outside. "Nature doesn't follow straight lines." The creek used to spread the water out naturally during storms. Now it has nowhere to go but up. The damage became clearer as days passed. The ground around the fancy homes stayed soggy. Grass started dying. Trees showed signs of stress. Water pooled in places where it had never collected before, unable to drain properly through the now buried natural waterways. Professional landscapers arrived to assess the damage. One overheard conversation caught Sarah's attention. "The root systems are rotting. These trees won't survive another season. The soil is completely waterlogged." Meanwhile, Sarah's older home on higher ground remained untouched. Her yard, which had always worked with the natural drainage patterns, stayed dry. The irony wasn't lost on her neighbors. The HOA called an emergency meeting. This time, attendance was mandatory, and a room was packed with angry homeowners. People who had once praised the concrete project now demanded answers. "My basement has 3 inches of water," one homeowner shouted. "My insurance company is saying this might not be covered because it's due to improper drainage." "The creek was fine before," another yelled. "Why did you change something that worked?" The HOA president tried to maintain control. "This is just a temporary issue. We'll hire engineers to fix the drainage problems. Your property values will be protected." But the mood in the room was beyond appeasing. People had spent fortunes on these homes, and watching their investments get destroyed by something they could have prevented created an anger that couldn't be soothed by promises. After the meeting, neighbors gathered in small groups. Sarah overheard snippets of conversations: lawsuit, negligence, property damage. The community that had been so focused on perfection was now fighting to save what was left of their homes. That night, rain started falling again. Sarah watched from her window as lights flickered on in house after house. People scrambled to check their basements, to move valuables to higher ground. The creek, now imprisoned in concrete, had become their worst enemy instead of their trusted friend. The neighborhood that had once been proud of its modern improvements now lived in fear of the next storm. And with weather forecasts predicting a wet season ahead, everyone knew this was just the beginning. As spring arrived, the true extent of the damage became impossible to ignore. What had started as puddles after storms evolved into permanent standing water. The neighborhood that once prided itself on perfect lawns now resembled something between a garden and a swamp. The smell hit visitors first. Stagnant water mixed with rotting vegetation created an odor that hung in the air, especially on warm days. Homeowners who used to open their windows for fresh air now kept them sealed shut, running air conditioning even when temperatures were mild. "This is worse than just water damage," a mold inspector told the Hendersons, whose basement had never dried properly. "You've got black mold growing in your walls. The whole first floor will need to be gutted." Property values plummeted faster than anyone had predicted. Houses that sold for $800,000 just last year were now having trouble finding buyers at $500,000. A local real estate agent, who had always been optimistic about market conditions, looked defeated when she put up another price reduction sign. "No one wants to move into a swamp," she admitted to Sarah during one of their morning walks. Even those who have offers fall through when buyers see the water damage reports. The mosquito problem exploded. What had once been a peaceful creek with moving water now included pockets of still, stagnant pools. By May, mosquito control trucks drove through the neighborhood twice a week, spraying chemicals that residents protested but couldn't refuse. Children who used to play outside now stayed indoors. The parks and shared spaces remained empty except for clouds of mosquitoes. Families who had moved here for the outdoor lifestyle found themselves prisoners in their homes. The HOA's financial troubles began mounting. Several homeowners stopped paying their monthly fees in protest. New assessments were proposed to fix the drainage issues, but many residents threatened legal action. They caused this problem. One homeowner raged at a community meeting. Why should we pay thousands more to fix their mistake? Engineering reports finally confirmed what the older residents had warned about. The concrete channel had disrupted the area's natural drainage system completely. Groundwater couldn't flow as it had for generations. Instead, it accumulated in new places, seeking weak spots in foundations and seeping into basements. The swimming pool at the community center, once a selling point for the HOA, developed cracks. The shifting, waterlogged ground beneath had become unstable. Pool maintenance crews pumped water out daily, only to find it refilled overnight with muddy groundwater. Daily life in the neighborhood transformed. Morning coffee rituals moved indoors as patios became swamp-like. Evening barbecues were canceled due to swarms of mosquitoes. Children's birthday parties relocated to indoor venues. The community that had valued outdoor living was being driven inside by the very improvement meant to enhance their lifestyle. Construction workers became regular visitors as homeowners attempted repairs. Sarah watched endless streams of trucks bring in new sump pumps, dehumidifiers, and foundation repair equipment. The noise of industrial fans and water pumps provided a constant background hum. Some families began packing up. The first for sale signs appeared in yards where proud homeowners had once stood. Each departure weakened the community spirit that had drawn people to this neighborhood. Those who remained felt trapped, unable to sell without taking huge losses, unable to stay without constant repairs. The concrete channel remained, an ugly monument to hubris. Water flowed through it reluctantly, fighting against its unnatural constraints. Nature, it seemed, was teaching them all an expensive lesson about the dangers of trying to remake the world without understanding it first. By summer, the news had spread beyond their neighborhood. Local television crews arrived to cover the story of the HOA that had turned a natural creek into a neighborhood problem. Residents who had once avoided attention now welcomed cameras, hoping public pressure might force solutions. The HOA finally hired lawyers, expensive ones who charged by the hour. Their first move was shocking. They sent Sarah a legal notice claiming she was responsible for not maintaining her portion of the waterway. The letter arrived by certified mail, demanding she pay thousands in fines. This is ridiculous. Sarah slapped the papers on her kitchen counter. They're the ones who destroyed the creek. Now they're trying to blame me. The legal action backfired spectacularly. Other residents saw it as a desperate attempt by the HOA to shift blame. Word spread quickly, and soon the neighborhood legal drama became public knowledge. A local environmental lawyer reached out to Sarah, offering to represent her for free if he could expose the HOA's environmental violations. Meanwhile, the Environmental Protection Agency finally responded to Sarah's earlier complaints. 3 EPA investigators arrived in June, armed with cameras, water testing equipment, and official documentation. They spent days examining the concrete channel, taking water samples, and interviewing residents. This waterway modification was done without proper environmental impact studies, the lead investigator announced at a public meeting. The permits filed with the county were incomplete and potentially fraudulent. We've documented multiple violations of the Clean Water Act. The HOA president's face turned ashen. Environmental violations carried heavy penalties, both financial and criminal. Other board members began distancing themselves, claiming they had relied on professional advice and weren't aware of regulations. Homeowners started organizing their own legal action. A class action lawsuit formed, seeking millions in damages. The lawsuit named both the HOA and its board members personally. Insurance coverage was questioned. Would the HOA's liability insurance even cover willful environmental damage? Phone calls to contractors revealed shocking information. The construction company had warned the HOA about potential drainage issues. They had recommended additional studies before proceeding. The HOA had rejected these recommendations to save money and time. They just wanted to get it done quickly, one contractor admitted privately to a reporter. When we mentioned possible flooding problems, they said property values were more important than drainage. They made us sign a waiver before starting the work. By August, the HOA faced multiple lawsuits, EPA fines, and homeowner rebellion. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss bankruptcy. Homeowners faced a devastating choice: pay huge special assessments to cover legal costs and repairs, or watch their HOA dissolve, leaving them responsible for infrastructure maintenance individually. Sarah's situation improved dramatically. The environmental lawyer defended her successfully, and the HOA had to drop all claims against her. More importantly, her property value remained stable while others plummeted. Potential homebuyers saw her house as the only safe option in the neighborhood. It sat above the flooding area and had avoided water damage. The local news coverage intensified. Television crews interviewed residents daily. Sarah reluctantly became the neighborhood spokesperson, explaining how the natural creek had worked for decades until the improvement project destroyed it. Nature had figured it out millions of years ago, Sarah told cameras. Our creek handled storms better than any concrete channel ever could. The HOA should have listened to those of us who'd lived here for generations. The community center closed indefinitely. Insurance refused to cover the pool repairs, citing pre-existing flooding conditions. The tennis courts cracked and warped. Even the playground equipment became unsafe as the ground remained unstable. Support groups formed for affected homeowners. Weekly meetings in church basements provided emotional outlets. Financial advisors offered free consultations. Mental health resources were brought in as several residents showed signs of severe stress. The neighborhood that once symbolized pristine suburban success now represented a cautionary tale about environmental ignorance and bureaucratic overreach. Television networks pitched it as a story about HOA power run amok. Real estate programs used it as an example of what could go wrong when communities ignored natural systems. By September, the first HOA board members resigned. The president faced personal bankruptcy as homeowners targeted him directly in lawsuits. The remaining board struggled to maintain basic services as funds dwindled and legal costs mounted. Retroies.